The observation deck of the Aaron's Bridge was quiet that morning. The station floated in high orbit above Venus, far enough from the burning planet. Below that the fires looked almost peaceful from up here, small orange lines drawn across a brown and gray surface like someone had dragged a hot finger across old stone. 3 figures stood at the wide curved window. They did not speak to each other at first. They just looked down. Vrathel stood tallest. He was a Vorith 8ft of dark-cowled muscle with a jaw that could crush bone and arms thick as tree trunks. His chest bore old ceremonial scars, each one earned in a different campaign across different star systems. He had been fighting since before most species in this galaxy had discovered fire. His government called him champion. His enemies called him worse things. He did not mind either. Beside him stood Salu. She was Athi, tall, thin, and covered in soft bioluminescent markings that shifted slowly between pale gold and cool blue depending on her mood. She had 4 eyes, each one capable of seeing in ranges no human instrument could replicate, and she moved with the kind of still contained grace that comes from knowing exactly how dangerous you are. She had 141 duels in 40 cycles. She had never lost. The third was Doro. He was Mechari, broad and enormous even by the standards of his own people, with 4 arms and a coat of dense gray-brown fur that made him look like a mountain. Had decided to stand up and start attending diplomatic meetings. His species came from a gas giant where atmospheric pressure alone could kill most beings in minutes. He was considered in 3 separate galactic cultural surveys the most physically intimidating living creature currently engaged in civil service. They had been brought to the Iran's bridge as official observers. The ceasefire on Virier this 4 was fragile, and the Galactic Mediation Council wanted neutral but powerful eyes on the process. The 3 champions had agreed for their own reasons. Vrathquil out of political obligation, Selu out of professional curiosity, Doro because he had heard something interesting about the human unit being deployed below and wanted to see it for himself. He had heard humans were monsters, not in a cruel way. Not the way you call someone a monster when you hate them, in the way you call something a monster when it does not die the way it should, when it keeps moving after it should have stopped, when it looks at things that would break any other creature and simply adjusts and continues. The Mechari had a word for it. It roughly translated to wrongly alive. The briefing room filled slowly. Council officials took their seats. Representatives from 2 of the Virian factions sat on opposite sides of a long table, not looking at each other. There were translators, advisors, security personnel from 4 different species. And then the humans walked in. There were 4 of them. Lieutenant Donna Vale led the group. She was not especially tall by human standards. The top of her head came to Vrathquake's chest, but she moved like someone who had decided a long time ago that the size of the room did not apply to her. She wore a standard issue peacekeeping uniform, carried a data tablet, and looked at the 3 champions with the same direct expression she would have given a weather report. Come. Unimpressed. Ready. Behind her came Corporal Leon Hayes, narrow-faced and watchful eyes moving across the room like a man who had spent too many years in places where not watching was how you got killed. Beside him walked Dr. Nina Akefer, a xenobiologist with thick-framed equipment over her eyes and a bag of scanning instruments over her shoulder, who looked at the alien champions with open scientific interest, the way a person looks at something extraordinary that they very much want to take apart and understand. The last one through the door was Cal Porter. He was unremarkable in the way that made Wrath look twice. Medium height, medium build, brown hair that had not been cut recently enough. He carried a large medical kit on his back and a smaller one on his hip, and he was reading something on a handheld screen as he walked in, finishing whatever it was before he looked up. When he finally did look up, his eyes moved around the room in a different way than the others, not checking for threats, not calculating, not analyzing. He was looking at people, all of them, including the Vathian representatives on opposite sides of the table, who flinched slightly when they noticed a human looking at them. Cal did not seem to notice their flinch, or if he did not react to it. He just found a place to stand and waited. Lieutenant Vale gave a short introduction. The human peacekeeping unit was there to support the ceasefire with medical and logistical assistance. They would be operating in the field during the agreed window. They were not combatants. They were there to help. Darrow leaned slightly toward Vrathquil and said quietly, in their shared military frequency, the small one with the medical bag, he does not look like the reports Vrathquil kept his eyes on Vale. None of them do up close. Celu and LT Unk and GT's markings flickered. The reports describe humans in combat. This is not combat yet, said Dorun. After the briefing ended, Vale's team filed out. Cal was the last to leave. At the door, he paused and looked back at the room, not at the champions, just at the room in general, the way you check a space when you're about to leave it and want to be sure you haven't forgotten anything. Then he left. The three champions stayed behind. Vrathquil pulled up the human military database on the shared console. Celu stood at his shoulder. Darun crossed two of his arms and read in silence. The records were not short. Humans had been fighting things since before they reached space. Each other, their own environment. Every predator evolution had designed to kill them. Their home planet Earth was so hostile that most species who reviewed the ecological data assumed it was a mistake. The gravity was high. The pathogens were numerous and aggressive. Weather events regularly destroyed entire regions. The fauna included creatures that injected poison, crushed prey with their bodies, or simply waited in the dark until something smaller walked past. And humans had not just survived this, they had built cities on it. They had named the predators. Some of them kept the smaller predators as companions in their homes, which no other species in the known galaxy had found a satisfying explanation for. In combat, the reports were consistent. Humans did not stop. Pain slowed them but rarely stopped them. Blood loss that would render most species unconscious left humans diminished but functional. There were documented cases of humans continuing to fight, to run, to carry others with injuries that should have ended them. They are not the biggest, said Celu, reading carefully. They are not the fastest. Their sensory range is poor. They do not have natural armor or natural weapons. No, said Rathkeel. But they do not seem to know that. Doron made a low sound in his chest. Not a laugh exactly, but something close. I want to watch them in the field, he said. The records tell me what They do. I want to see why. Neither Vrathil nor Selu argued. They arranged access to the drone. Observation feeds for the following morning when the ceasefire window would open and Calporter's medical team would move into the ruins below. Outside the window this 4 turned slowly in. The dark fires still burned on the surface. The ceasefire was hours away. The planet did not look like it was going to make anything easy for anyone. Going down there, the morning of the ceasefire, the rain on Verthis 4 was the color of weak tea. It came down thin steady sheets that smelled faintly of minerals and old smoke. The ground was soft in some places and broken in others, cracked stone and collapsed walls and stretches of open rubble where buildings had stood a few weeks before. The air was breathable for humans but carried a faint chemical edge that made the back of the throat feel dry. Calporter did not seem to notice any of this. He had been on worse planets. He and Leon Hayes moved through the eastern district of the city at a steady pace, not rushing, not doling. The pace of people with a lot of work ahead of them who have learned that running at the start means stopping too soon at the end. Leon carried a weapon and walked slightly ahead, checking corners and open spaces. Cal carried his medical kits and walked just behind, already mentally organizing what was in each bag. The triage station was a collapsed market building with enough of its roof still intact to keep the rain off. Cal had chosen it the day before from satellite images. It had 2 open entrances, which meant no one would feel trapped inside, and it was close enough to the neutral line that people from both factions could reach it without crossing into hostile ground. He had thought about this for a while. People who needed help often did not come get it if coming got them killed. Leon helped him set up the basic equipment, folding table, supply cases, the small portable sterilizer that hummed when it was working and smelled like clean air. When they were done, Leon leaned against the wall and looked out at the gray, wet ruins around them. Nass says the 3 big ones are watching, he said. Cal was checking his supply count. The champions, Leon confirmed. Drone feed. Apparently they arranged it last night. Okay, said Cal. Leon looked at him. That's it, okay. I don't know what else you want me to say. I don't know something. They're basically the 3 most dangerous beings in the known galaxy, and they're watching us. They're watching you too. Cal said, you look more interesting. You have a gun. Leon was quiet for a moment, then he said, I genuinely cannot tell if you're joking. Cal almost smiled. Neither can I most days. The first people arrived within 20 minutes of them opening the station. Small group of Arthian civilians, 2 adults and 3 children, all from the Eastern faction, judging by the color markings on their clothing. One of the adults had a badly wrapped wound on her arm. One of the children was being carried and was not fully conscious. Cal went to the child first. He did not ask which faction they were from. He did not look at their markings more than once. He crouched down to the child's level, spoke softly even though they could not understand his language, and began his assessment with the same steady hands and focused attention he brought to every patient. The adult who had been carrying the child watched him with wide, uncertain eyes, the look of someone who has been afraid for so long that they have forgotten what it feels like not to be. Cal noticed he kept his movement slow and visible, narrating what he was doing in a calm, even voice. The child had a fever and a head wound. That was not as bad as it looked, but had been bleeding for long enough to cause real concern. Cal cleaned it, dressed it properly, gave the child something for the fever, and showed the adult how to monitor the bandage. He did all of this in about 8 minutes. More people came, a man with a broken hand, an elderly Virian who had inhaled too much smoke and needed her airway cleared, 2 young men from the Western faction, both wounded, who arrived at the station at the same time as 3 people from the Eastern faction, and stopped when they saw each other. Leon put his hand on his weapon, not raising it, just touching it, letting them know it was there. Cal stepped between the groups, not dramatically, just practically, the way you step between 2 things that are about to fall into each other. He looked at both groups and said, "Sit down. I'll get to everyone." His voice was not loud, it was not commanding exactly, it was just certain, in the way that someone is certain when they have decided something completely, and there is nothing left to argue about. Both groups sat down. Leon exhaled slowly through his nose. Aboard the Aaron's bridge in the observation deck, 3 alien champions watched this through a drone feed without speaking. Selu's bioluminescent markings had gone very still, pale, and even the color they went when she was thinking hard. She had seen human soldiers in combat recordings, fast, aggressive, relentless. This was different. The medic was moving through a crowd of potential enemies with no weapon in his hands, and the complete settled confidence of someone who has made peace with every possible outcome. Vrathquil watched the 2 factions sitting down. He had spent 60 years studying conflict. He knew how to read a group of people who wanted to fight. He could see the tension in them, the way they held their bodies, the quick sideways looks, and he had watched one small human with a medical bag make them sit down with 6 words and no threat. Doron said nothing. He was watching Cal's hands. Specifically, he was watching how Cal touched patients. Confident, careful, never rough, always purposeful. The Mercury valued strength above almost everything, but there was a kind of precision in those hands that Doron found himself watching with something that was not quite respect yet, but was moving in that direction. And then the explosion happened. It came from the east, a hard flat crack, followed by a deep rolling boom that shook dust from the market buildings remaining ceiling. Leon was already moving before the echo faded, pulling Cal behind a standing section of wall, scanning the street outside with sharp eyes. The civilians scattered. The 2 factions forgot about each other and ran in opposite directions. The triage station, so recently almost calm, became a place of shouting and running feet and the sound of more explosions further away. "Ceasefire's broken," Leon said, flat and unsurprised. He checked the street, east side. Someone jumped the gun. Cal pressed against the wall beside him and looked at their supplies, some of it scattered, most of it still on the table. He was already thinking about what could be saved and moved. Then both of them saw Kay. The Vorath soldier came around the corner of a collapsed building about 20 m away, stumbling badly. He was enormous, even injured and barely upright. He was the size of a vehicle, and he was clearly in serious trouble. Piece of shrapnel the size of a human forearm was embedded in the left side of his torso. His secondary arm, the smaller one below his main right arm, was hanging at an angle that arms did not hanging it naturally. His eyes were open but not focused. He was moving on. Instinct, not direction, the way a creature moves when its body is still. Going, but its mind has started to let go. He saw them. His main hand moved too. His weapon a reflex, nothing more. He raised it halfway toward Cal. His arm gave out, the weapon dropped. K hit the ground on his knees, then fell sideways. Against the rubble, Leon raised his rifle. His voice was low and very clear. Cal, leave him. Cal was already moving. Cal covered the 20 between himself and Ked in seconds, not running but moving. Fast and low, the way people move when they are in a hurry, but also trying not to be a target. He dropped to his knees beside the fallen Vorith soldier before the dust from Ket's collapse had fully settled. Leon did not lower his rifle. He moved to the side, putting himself at an angle where he could cover both Cal and the street beyond, and he kept his eyes moving. The street, Cal, K, the street again, in the constant rotation of a man who has kept people alive in bad places and knows that stopping the rotation is how they stop staying alive. Cal, Leon said again, quieter this time. Cal did not answer. He was already assessing. K was enormous up close, even collapsed and barely conscious. The Vorith soldier took up more space than seemed reasonable for a single being. His chest rose and fell in shallow, irregular movements. The shrapnel in his side had gone in at an angle that suggested it had hit something important. The secondary arm was definitely broken in multiple places. His scales dark green-black, marked with the faded remnants of military insignia, were dull in the way that all wounded things go dull, like color is the first thing the body stops spending energy on. His eyes opened when Cal's hands touched him. They focused slowly, then sharpened, and for a moment Ket looked at the human kneeling over him with an expression that was half confusion and half the old animal recognition of a predator looking at something it might still be able to fight. He moved his hand toward where his weapon had fallen. Cal reached out and gently, firmly moved the hand away. Not hard, not rough. He just redirected it the way you move a child's hand away from something hot, practical, calm, without anger or fear. I'm going to help you, Cal said. He said it in his own language, knowing K could not understand the words. He said it anyway because he always talked to his patients. It helped them, he thought, even when they could not follow the language. The tone was the thing. The tone said, I know you are scared. I know you are in pain. I am not going to hurt you. He opened the first medical kit aboard the Aaron's bridge on the observation deck 3 km. Above the surface, Champion Vrathquil stopped breathing for a moment. He knew K not personally. The Vorith military was vast and Vrathquil had no connection to this particular soldier. But he knew what K was. He could see the unit markings faded as they were. He could see the build, the age of the scars, the specific type of weapon that had fallen from Ket's hand. He was a field combatant from a Vorith military unit, not the faction Vrathil served, but Vorith nonetheless, his people. He watched the human medic open a case of instruments and begin working on his people's soldier. Selu stood very still beside him. Her markings had gone to a steady, pale, cool tone, the color she turned when something was happening that she did not have a framework for yet. She was constructing one, running through logic chains quickly, looking for the explanation, perhaps the human Did not know Kay had pointed a weapon at him. She dismissed that he clearly had. Perhaps he intended to take the soldier prisoner. She dismissed that too. He had no restraints, no communication device to call for support, and his body language showed no interest in control. He was not looking at Kay the way you look at a prisoner. He was looking at him the way you look at a problem you intend to solve. Perhaps it was performance. Perhaps he knew he was being watched. She almost held on to that one. Then she remembered Nina Akafer had confirmed the feed access was arranged quietly through back channels. The human medic had not been told. He did not know 3 alien champions were watching him through a drone the size of a thumb hovering 40 m above his head. Celo and LT Unk and GT's markings flickered. Doro had not moved since Ket fell. He stood with 2 of his forearms crossed over his chest and 2 hanging loose, which was unusual. He normally held all 4 in some active configuration. He was watching Cal's hands. The medic worked fast. He had cut away part of the material around the shrapnel wound and was doing something precise and uncomfortable looking, his hands steady even when Kay's body jerked reflexively. He spoke the whole time, quiet, even calm words in his own language, a continuous low sound, like a river that has decided what direction it is going and is not interested in being redirected. C's hand moved again weakly toward Cal's arm. Cal let it rest there. He did not pull away. He just kept working with his other hand, talking, not looking at the hand on his arm except once briefly to check. The cat was not trying to grip hard enough to cause a problem. He was not. The hand was just resting there, the way a very sick creature reaches for something solid when the world stops making sense. Cal did not comment on this. He kept working. Doro made a sound in his chest, very low, not a word. It took 4 minutes and 12 seconds. Celu timed it precisely because precision was how she kept herself steady when she was unsettled, and she was very unsettled for minutes and 12 seconds in which the human medic was completely exposed, crouching over an enemy combatant twice, his mass, both hands occupied, back to the open street, weapon on the ground behind him where Lion had kicked it away from Kay's reach for minutes, in which anyone with a clear line of sight could have ended him. He did not look up once to check. He trusted Leon to handle that. He trusted the situation to hold. Or maybe Vrathquil thought, watching, he simply had decided that the 4 minutes were worth the risk and had stopped thinking about the risk entirely, because thinking about the risk used attention he needed for the work. When it was done, Kel sat back on his heels and looked at what he had accomplished. The shrapnel was out, the wound was packed and sealed with a fast-setting biological compound that Celu recognized as the human field version of surgical closure, functional, not elegant, but it would hold. Kay's breathing had slowed to something more regular. He was deeply unconscious now, which was probably better for everyone. Cal reached into the side pocket of his kit and took out a small beacon. He pressed it to Kay's chest where it would transmit location to any recovery team scanning on that frequency. Then he stood up. He rolled his shoulders once, looked at his hands, checking them, not in distress, just checking the automatic quality inspection of someone who works with their hands and knows the value of keeping them functional. He wiped them on a clean cloth from his kit. Then he picked up the kit, nodded at Leon, and they moved on. They moved on as if they had just stopped to check a map, as if nothing extraordinary had occurred, as if kneeling unprotected over an enemy combatant who had tried to raise a weapon at him and spending 2 full trauma kits and 4 minutes of open exposure to keep that enemy alive was simply part of the morning's work, which apparently for Cal Porter it had always been on the observation deck. No one spoke. Was looking at the feed, but not quite seeing it anymore. He was looking at something else, some interior calculation that was happening in the deep old part of his mind where he kept the things that mattered. He had fought in 11 wars. He had seen acts of courage that made him proud and acts of cruelty that made him ashamed. He had never seen anything like this, and the reason it was hitting him so hard was that he could not find the word for it in the Vorith military vocabulary. There was no word for this, for fighting without fighting, for protecting an enemy without gaining anything, for looking at someone who had just tried to kill you and responding with care. Sello had stopped constructing her logical framework. The framework kept coming back empty. She had been awarded her first championship title for a strategic decision so precise and ruthless that 3 military academies still taught it. She understood power. She understood calculation. She did not understand what she had just watched. Doron finally uncrossed his arms. He sat down in the nearest chair slowly, the way something very large sits when the weight it is carrying is not the weight of its body. He did not say anything for a long time. Down on the surface in the rain and the rubble and the distant sound of gunfire, Cal Porter reached the next patient and got to work. The ceasefire was restored by mid-afternoon. It held this time shakily, like a man standing on ice that he is not sure will support him, but it held. The shooting stopped. The smoke over the eastern district thinned. Recovery teams from both factions moved into the rubble to collect their wounded, and the Galactic Mediation Council issued a statement that used words like encouraging progress and continued commitment to dialogue, which was what they said when things were bad, but not as bad as yesterday. Cal Porter's team withdrew from the field 2 hours before sunset. They were dirty and tired, and had run through more supplies than Cal had wanted to use in a single day. Leon had a shallow cut on his forearm from flying debris, not serious but present. He was bandaging it himself. When they walked back into the landing bay, Cal looked at the bandage, said, "That's backwards," and redid it without being asked. Leon allowed this. They did not talk much on the ride up to the station. They were the kind of tired where talking takes more than you have left. Nina Acapper met them at the bay door. She had the expression of someone who has been sitting with information all day and has been very patient about it, but is not going to be patient much longer. The champions didn't move, she said. Leon looked at her. "What, during the cat situation?" Nina said. "I had access to the biometric overlay on their observation feed, Standard Council monitoring for high-profile guests. All 3 of them stopped moving physically. Stopped. Vrath's respiratory rate dropped to resting levels while he was standing, which for Vorith only happens when they are in deep shock or very deep focus. Cello and LT Unk and GT bioluminescence went flat. That's a stress response in Arithi. It happens when their processing load exceeds comfortable parameters. Doro sat down. Darun sat down. Leon repeated, "Mechari champions do not sit during field observation." Nina said it is considered a sign of weakness in their culture. They are supposed to stand the entire time as a demonstration that they could personally do better than whatever they are watching. She paused. He sat down. Cal had been listening to this while doing a basic inventory of what they had used. He stopped. Are they all right? Nat looked at him for a moment. They are fine, she said. Carefully, they are processing something. Cal nodded and went back to his inventory. The debrief was called that evening. Council chamber standard format. Each observer unit was asked to deliver a field assessment. It was routine procedure that the mediation council used to keep everyone informed and accountable, and it usually produced a lot of precise professional language about unit performance and operational logistics. Lieutenant Donna Vale gave the human unit's assessment. It was crisp and honest the way Vale did everything. They had treated 43 patients across 3 hours of active field time, lost some supplies to the initial explosion, maintained the triage station until the second ceasefire held, and withdrew in good order. She noted that the ceasefire violation had occurred approximately 90 minutes into the window, which suggested that at least one party was not fully committed to the process. The council thanked her. Then it was the champion's turn. Vrathquil went first. He stood at the front of the chamber with the bearing of someone who has stood in front of difficult audiences for decades and has stopped being impressed by rooms. He delivered his assessment in precise, measured sentences. The human peacekeeping unit had operated professionally. Their field medic had demonstrated technical skill. Their security personnel had maintained appropriate situational awareness. Throughout, he paused. They operated outside of anticipated parameters, he said. The council waited for him to expand on this. He did not. He returned to his seat. Cello and LT Unk and GT assessment was longer and more detailed as ATH assessments always were. She covered movement patterns, response times, resource allocation, decision-making. Under pressure, it was thorough and accurate. At the end, she noted that she would be submitting a supplementary analysis within the next cycle, as she felt her initial observations required additional processing time before she could characterize them accurately. The council accepted this. Doro's assessment was 4 sentences. He said the human unit had performed its function. He said the field conditions had been difficult. He said he had no tactical concerns to raise. He sat down. Afterward, the 3 champions found themselves together again on the observation deck. It was habit by now. When the formal sessions ended, they came here. The view was good, and the room was private, and they had established without ever discussing it that this was where they could say the things that could not be said in the chamber. For a while they did not say anything at all. The planet below turned slowly. Night was moving across the surface, covering the day's damage in darkness the way night does temporarily. Without judgment, Doro spoke first. Was that Vorith soldier worth saving? Vrathquil looked at the planet. That is not the question that is keeping me standing here. Doro waited. Question, Vrathquil said, is whether I would have done the same if I had been the one in that street, if it had been a human soldier down in the rubble and the weapon had already dropped and there was nothing to be gained and nothing to be lost either way. He stopped. I do not have an answer to that question. I have Fought in 11 campaigns. I have made decisions under fire that I am proud of, and decisions I am less proud of. I have never had to consider this particular decision, and I find that fact uncomfortable. Selu was looking at her own hands. Her markings were slow and low, cycling through deep blues. I have been constructing a logical model for what the human did, she said. I have been constructing it since this morning. The model keeps coming back empty, empty. How? Doro asked. There is no output, she said. In every framework I have for understanding acts of mercy or restraint, there is a benefit to the one who performs it: reputation, political capital, future leverage, tactical advantage from having a living asset rather than a dead one. She paused. The human did not know he was being observed. The enemy soldier was alone and would have died without assistance. The act would have gone entirely unrecorded if we had not been watching, and the medic showed no interest in what happened to the soldier. Afterward, he left a beacon and moved on. He did not even look back. He checked the recovery report this morning, Nina Akepper said from the doorway. All 3 champions turned. She was standing just inside the room, holding a data tablet, having clearly been there for at least part of the conversation. She met their eyes without flinching, which was something Doro noted with involuntary respect. The soldier survived, Nena said. Ket, he was recovered by a Vorith medical team, and he is going to live. And Cal checked the recovery report first thing this morning, before his supply count, before the debrief prep before breakfast. She let that sit for a moment. He checks on all of them. Every patient he treats, he follows up if he can get the data. He does not talk about it. He does not log it officially. He just checks. Vrathill was quiet for a long time. He does not. No, we know that, he said finally. No, Na said. Another silence. Doro reached for his cup, which had been sitting on the console since the previous evening, still untouched. He looked at it. He put it back down. In my language, he said slowly, there is a phrase, we say it when a warrior sees something that makes their own strength feel small, not because the thing they saw was more powerful, because it was something they are not sure they could have done. He paused. I have said that phrase twice in my life. Before tonight, once when I watched my teacher die holding a pass so the rest of us could retreat, once when a young soldier in my unit carried a wounded enemy for 6 miles through hostile terrain and then sat down and cried and then got up and went back to work. He looked out at the planet. I said it again today. Nas stood in the doorway a little longer. Then she said very quietly, I'll tell Lieutenant Vale you said so. Vrathquil shook his head. Do not tell the medic. He said he will not understand why it matters to us, and I do not have enough words in any shared language to explain it. 3 weeks after the incident on Verthis 4, the Galactic Mediation Council released its official report on the peacekeeping operation. It was a long document. Most of it was procedural, tables of statistics, timelines of the ceasefire negotiations, assessments of the Vathian factions, willingness to continue dialogue, recommendations for ongoing observation. The kind of document that people who needed to make decisions would read carefully and everyone else would skim and set aside. Buried in the appendix between a logistical breakdown of supply chain operations and a map of demilitarized zones was a short addendum. It had been submitted voluntarily. No one on the council had requested it. There was, in fact, no formal mechanism for such a thing. The addendum had required a council administrator to create a new document category on the spot because in the 300-year history of galactic mediation proceedings, 3 alien champions from 3 different species had never submitted a joint statement about anything. The addendum was 3 paragraphs long. Vrathquil's paragraph was written in formal Vorith military style, which meant it was precise and without decoration. Every word chosen because it was the correct word and not the interesting one. He described the incident clearly: date, time, location, parties involved, sequence of events. He noted that the human medic had treated an enemy combatant under active fire conditions, using significant resources with no strategic benefit and no expectation of return. He noted that the medic had subsequently tracked the patient's recovery through back-channel reporting, again with no formal acknowledgement. Then in the final 2 sentences, the ones that the council staff would later say stopped them cold when they first translated it. Vrathquil wrote, "I have been in active military service for 61 years. I do not know if I would have done the same, and I do not know yet what that means about me, but I believe it is a question I am obligated to continue asking." Cello and LT Uncan GT's paragraph was, as expected, analytical. She listed the reasons the act made no strategic sense. She was thorough about it. 14 distinct points, each briefly argued the human had no reason to believe the act would be recorded. The resources used were significant relative to the unit's operational capacity. The risk to the medic himself was real and uncompensated by any foreseeable benefit. She worked through the list methodically, the way she worked through everything, and then in the last sentence she wrote, "I have been unable to identify a 15th reason, and the absence of that reason has not left me. In the weeks since I watched the incident occur." Doro and LT Uncan GT's paragraph was the shortest. He had clearly struggled with it. Nina Akepper, who helped with the translation, said later that he had written and discarded 6 versions before settling on this one. It read, "The Deathworlders are named for the world they survived. I had understood this to mean they were hard. I did not understand it to mean they were also this. They carry death with them every day because everything on their world tried to give it to them, and they learned to choose, sometimes not to pass it on. I did not know that was possible. I did not know that was what strength could look like." The addendum was not publicized by the council. It was part of an official record, accessible to member state governments and registered diplomatic observers, but it was not announced or highlighted. Nevertheless, within 2 weeks it had been read by every major military intelligence office in the galactic community, forwarded across academic networks, discussed in at least 4 separate diplomatic channels, and translated into 19 languages, 3 of which did not previously have a word for compassion as a standalone concept, and had to create one. The humans, for the most part, did not find out about it right away. The 7th Interstellar Humanitarian Corps was already 3 star systems away from this 4 deployed to a water crisis on a planet whose name translated roughly as place where the rivers argued. Cal Porter was setting up a new triage station in a flooded valley when Leon Hayes received The forwarded text from a contact in the diplomatic corps. Leon read it twice. Then he walked across the station to where Cal was cataloging water purification supplies, and he read it. Aloud, he read Vrathquil's paragraph. He read Selu's paragraph. He read Doro's paragraph. Cal kept sorting supplies for the first two. On the third, he slowed down. When Leon finished, Cal was holding a water filter and looking at it. Without really looking at it, there was a long pause. Huck, Cal said. Leon stared at him. That's it. Good, Cal added. 3 of the most powerful beings in the known galaxy wrote 3 paragraphs about what you did, Leon said slowly with the careful pronunciation of someone making sure they are not being misunderstood, and it has apparently sparked a diplomatic and academic conversation across 19 species. And you are saying, good. Cal considered this. He set the water filter down. Ket made it, he said. Leon blinked. What? K, the Vorith soldier. I checked the recovery report when we got to the system. It was in the transfer data. He made it. He is alive. The field closure held, and the Vorith medical team got there within the recovery window. Cal picked up another filter. That's the part that matters. Leon opened his mouth, then he closed it. He looked at the paragraph on his tablet again. Doro's paragraph, specifically the part about the Deathworlders choosing not to pass on the death they carried, and then he looked at Cal, who had moved on to the next box of supplies with the same focused, practical attention he brought to every task. You're not going to be moved by any of this at all, are you? Leon said. I'm moved, Cal said mildly. It's good that they understood it. I hope it means something to them for a long time. But Cal looked at him. But K is alive. That's what I went down there to do. He paused. And there are 40 people in this valley right now who need clean water, so he went back to work. Leon stood there for another moment, the tablet in his hand, Doro's words about strength on the screen. Then he put the tablet away and went to help. That evening, Donneville received a formal communication from the Galactic Mediation Council. It informed her that the joint addendum had been officially entered into the permanent record of galactic diplomatic proceedings, and that the Council had for the first time in its history opened a new classification category for the record extraordinary acts of cross-species significance. Calporter's field action on Verthis for was the first entry. She read the communication twice. Then she looked out the porthole at the stars, old and still and scattered across the dark, each one presiding over its own worlds with their own old ways of measuring what mattered. She thought about telling Cal. She decided he would just say the same thing again. K is alive. That's the part that matters. She thought he was probably right. The stars did not move. The galaxy turned slowly and enormously, the way it always had, full of species who had spent thousands of years building frameworks for understanding power and honor and strength and what it meant to be the most dangerous thing in the room. And somewhere in a flooded valley, 3-star systems from where any of this had started, a tired human medic with a backwards bandaged friend was making sure 40 strangers had clean water to drink because they needed it, and that was the job, and the job was enough, and it had always been enough, and it would continue to be enough until there was no more work left to do. There was always more work left to do.